We had a very beautiful few days here in celebration. Of course, on Friday when we had the beautiful entrance of the Most Holy Theotokos into the temple. And now today on the 9th Sunday of the Most Holy and God-fearing Sunday of Luke and beautiful saints. But we definitely had this morning a very significant gospel reading, something that serves as a great reminder to us all to understand, to see, and to know how we are meant to live. We're probably familiar, at least somewhat, with the gospel reading. I know it is one that St. Basil often speaks about in his book, especially on some of his writings. But it does beg the question of what it is that is meant for us to do while we are here. We're taught so many different things. We're taught that when we have children, that we need to make sure we bring them up correctly, give them a good education, and we teach them to work hard, to do their homework, to be diligent. If it so moves them to move on into higher learning or into any trade that they choose, we know that they're asked to excel day in and day out. Work hard so that you can take care of your future self. Then as they get older, they get their jobs and they work. They put in all the hours. They work themselves because they want a better life for their soon-to-be family. Then they get married and they work hard, both of them oftentimes, to be able to take care of themselves and their future children. And as they have children, they work continually to provide for them, to put away for the kids' education, to put away for their retirement. And they continue on in our life. We get older and we get older. The kids go away, and now we focus all our attention on to making sure that we have a nice nest egg for ourselves so that we can be properly taken care of when we get older. And then we hope that one day, when we reach a time to retire, that we can lovingly with each other retire and go and live a life without much worry. And that's not a terrible model. We understand why it's important to do those things. But with all that work that we put in to preparing ourselves for the possibility of retirement, and I say that because there's many who never reach retirement, or even if they do, it is but for a short period. Now, only if we work so diligently to make sure that our souls were in the proper place, in good standing with God. We forget oftentimes. We don't worry about it. We put it off as something that we have to worry about later in life. There was a tradition in the early church for some people to try to hold off their baptism until they were on the verge of death. Now, you could argue that's trying to cheat the system, but what they're trying to do is make sure that they could live their lives and be forgiven of everything on the day of their baptism, right as they're getting ready to pass away. Understandable in theory, terrible in implementation. For as in the gospel here today, we hear this man saying, you know what? He had an abundance of the crop that year. And he said, you know what? I'm going to tear down my barns and build bigger ones. Because I have plenty to take care of myself for the rest of my life, to be able to eat, drink, and be merry. And God calls him the foolish man because, as we heard that very night, his soul was asked of him. So all that work, everything he did, amounted to nothing when the time of our passing goes, and it's time to see what treasures we put away in our heavenly retirement. We worry so much about holding on to everything, to the point of greed. And that is truly what was happening this day. Much like I said earlier, the foolishness of waiting until their very last moment to be baptized is that if you die of a sudden heart attack, your time has ended. Putting off confession, putting off baptism, and all of those things can one day lead to a traumatic event and us be woefully underprepared or even unprepared for what is to come. Greed drove the man in the parable this morning because you could ask, why didn't he just sell everything right then? He'd probably have more than enough to take care of himself. But St. Basil writes, the ideology, the thinking of the man was that, you know what, I'll wait for there to be a problem. Maybe a famine, maybe a drought, something to arise. And then I can bring this crop to market. It was his own greed that drove him, thinking how well off he could do. So much so in his own mind, he'd rather see that crop rot than allow it to feed the people that are in need. First off, we know in the Old Testament that God calls us to give 10% of everything that we harvest, everything that we bring in goes to God first. And it's not the worst of the crops, as in the story of Cain and Abel, but instead the best are given to the temple first. How many of us even practice giving a portion of a percentage to God in what we make? We enter in this period now where we're talking about stewardship. The materials we mailed out later this week, they'll give you the upcoming campaign. The future of our church, of the archdiocese, everything depends on what we are willing to give. This is the one time of year I speak about this subject. But it is significant that it's the gospel reading today. In fact, if you ever have a chance to go read St. Basil's book on social justice, I recommend it. Because if you need to do a spring cleaning, reading that book will have you clean your house better than you ever could imagine. Because Basil is very to the point. He says, why do you have 2 coats? You don't need 2 coats. Give one to the poor. Why do you have so many pairs of shoes? You only need one. Give the rest to those who have none. He warns us not to stack up our riches now, but be generous. And it's important in this time that we're in the Advent season, the season of fasting before the Feast of the Nativity. For the 40 days we started last Saturday, the 15th, with this beautiful fast. But one thing that oftentimes gets forgotten when fasting begins, it's also a time for us to give alms. Luckily for us, so many different organizations are in need. Not only the church, but go to any corner, any store, and you'll see someone ringing the bell asking for money for those less fortunate. We must do what we can to be charitable and cheerful givers. Giving of not only our money, but our time and our talents. As we go about and you enter into prayerful discernment, as the metropolis likes to say, when you get the stewardship material for this coming year, don't just fill it out quickly with whatever you've given in the past, but do a prayerful contemplation. Pray to God. Ask Him to show you what you can give to God. If you haven't raised your stewardship in 20 years, ask yourself how happy you would be with a job that didn't give you a raise in 20 years. If you put the dollar in the tray, the same as you did in 1968, ask yourself, how happy would you be not receiving the $12 that would be worth in the inflation over the years? This is not a moment for us to be critical of what you give, but instead for you to take a moment and contemplate about what you're able to do. to help take care of God's ministry. We're blessed with almost an unprecedented time of growth within our community. But are we willing to continue to fund the ministries that are ever existent? And the more ministries that are going to begin because of the more people that we have. So let us not be like the foolish rich man that we read about in the parable today, hoarding everything for ourselves. But let us make sure we take care of ourselves, but let us make sure we take care of what we love as well. And we love our community. We love our church. We love our group. So as you get the material and as you start to fill those things out, as I said, say a prayer. Ask God to guide you. And just take a look at your own home finances and how